Welcome to the Tube Duel Original Podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you joining us today. We're going to be using clear, accessible English, perfect if you're an A2 to B2 learner, to dive into one of the most wild and dramatic stories in business history. We're going through an explainer about how the world's biggest mobile phone company lost everything in just a few short years. It's a crazy story of massive success, totally missed opportunities, and a reminder of just how fast the tech world can flip upside down.
Here is our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with the golden age, move into the smartphone revolution, uncover their internal fears and failures, discuss the famous burning platform, and wrap up with lessons from the fall. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The Golden Age. To really grasp how far Nokia fell, we first have to understand just how incredibly huge they were at the top. Now, a golden age is an awesome vocabulary term. It basically means a time when something is at its absolute best or most successful. For Nokia, their golden age was the late 1990s and early 2000s. They were the undisputed king of mobile phones. Interestingly, this company from Finland actually started out making paper back in the 1800s. But by the 90s, they had completely transformed into a global technology powerhouse.
Everybody, and I mean everybody, knew that iconic blue logo and the famous slogan, "Connecting People." People everywhere loved these phones. Devices like the Nokia 3310 were legendary because they were just so reliable. You know, it even became a massive internet joke that the 3310 was literally indestructible. You could drop it down a flight of stairs and it would just keep right on working.
To put their sheer dominance into perspective, think about this. In 2007, Nokia held an unbelievable 49% of the global mobile handset market. Basically, half of all the mobile phones on planet Earth were made by this one single company. Their sales were through the roof, their profits were massive, and honestly, they seemed completely unstoppable. Moving on to Section 2, the smartphone revolution. This is where we see how getting a little too comfortable can become incredibly dangerous. To survive in the tech world, you have to innovate, meaning you constantly have to create new ideas and better ways of doing things. But when Apple introduced the touchscreen iPhone in 2007, Nokia just didn't innovate fast enough. Steve Jobs gets up on stage, shows off a phone with zero physical buttons, just a giant piece of glass, and Nokia executives actually dismissed it. They thought the battery was too weak and it cost way too much. They totally missed that Apple hadn't just made a new phone, they had invented a completely new category of device.
The real battle happened behind the scenes, with the software itself. Nokia stubbornly stuck with their old operating system called Symbian. Now, Symbian was fine for basic older phones, but it was a total nightmare for software developers to build apps for. On the flip side, Apple's iOS and Google's new Android system were specifically built from the ground up to be developer-friendly. They created these massive app stores. More apps brought in more users, which brought in even more developers. Nokia tried to fight back, but their system was just way too clunky to compete.
The smartphone revolution crushed Nokia with breathtaking speed. It's actually hard to believe how fast it happened. 2007, the iPhone launches. 2008, Android hits the scene. By 2010, the public decided they wanted touchscreen pocket computers, and Nokia's market share goes into a rapid nosedive. Over the span of just 6 years, the situation turned into a complete emergency for the Finnish giant.
Section 3. Internal fears and failures. You're probably thinking, wait, why didn't Nokia just fight back? Well, the most shocking twist in this whole story is that Nokia actually had touchscreen prototypes years before Apple even released the iPhone. They literally had the future in their hands. So why didn't they build it?
It was a really toxic mix of problems. First off, they were incredibly overconfident. They honestly thought their brand was just too beloved to fail. Add to that some intense internal wars. Instead of working together, different teams were fighting over whether to keep using Symbian or switch to a new system called MeeGo. While they were busy arguing internally, they moved at a snail's pace, and Apple and Samsung just sprinted right past them.
Researchers also uncovered a major factor called fear-based ignorance. And this is fascinating. Inside Nokia, middle managers were absolutely terrified of the top executives. They were so scared of delivering bad news that they essentially hid the truth. While the company was actively losing the smartphone war, managers were telling the bosses that everything was totally fine and that they could hit these impossible targets. Because the reality was hidden, the top leaders had no clue how much danger they were in until it was way too late.
Section 4. The burning platform. This is the climax of our explainer, where leadership finally wakes up and smells the smoke. Reality hit them like a freight train. After peaking around 2007, their turnover and operating profit simply fell completely off a cliff as their market share collapsed. Their older phones were sitting on shelves, and their new smartphones just couldn't hold a candle to Android and Apple. So in 2011, Nokia brings in a new CEO, Stephen Aloff. In a desperate bid to save the company, he sends out his famous burning platform memo to the entire staff. He basically says, imagine you're standing on a burning oil platform in the freezing ocean. You have to jump into the icy water to survive. Aloff told his team they had to immediately ditch their old Symbian software and take a massive leap of faith by switching to Microsoft's Windows Phone system.
But jumping to Windows Phone didn't work. The market had already spoken. People wanted Androids and iPhones, not Windows phones. This leads us to our final vocabulary word today, acquisition, which is simply when one company buys another. In 2013, Microsoft swooped in for an acquisition, buying Nokia's mobile phone division for over $7 billion. Tragically, the whole Windows Phone strategy crashed so hard that Microsoft ended up writing off almost the entire value of that purchase and laying off thousands of workers shortly after.
Section 5, Lessons from the Fall. Let's wrap things up by looking at why this story actually matters to us today.
First off, spoiler alert, Nokia didn't completely die. Even though they lost the smartphone battle and sold their phone business, they pivoted brilliantly. Today, they are a massive, successful company focused on building 5G network infrastructure. They literally build the networks that power the very smartphones that defeated them. How ironic is that?
Still, the lesson of their phone division is perfectly captured in this really heartbreaking quote from CEO Stephen Aloff. "We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost." It's a chilling quote because it completely misunderstands how business works. In a world that's changing at lightning speed, simply doing the exact same thing you've always done is doing something wrong. Failing to innovate, ignoring the bad news, failing to adapt, that is exactly what doing something wrong looks like.
So I want to leave you with a provocative question. Whether you're mastering English, running a business, or just navigating your career, are you ignoring the next big revolution just because you feel a bit too comfortable today? Remember, never stop learning and never stop adapting. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer on the TubeDuel Original podcast. Keep up the great work with your English, and I'll catch you next time.